Because once you land on Molokai, you feel something different. You just feel the presence of Damien. You feel the presence of those who were there at the leprosy settlement on that peninsula. It was up until 1969, I believe, in the late 60s, when they finally, said, okay, no more leprosy victims are going to be sent to Molokai.
Welcome to the Christian Channel. I'm your host, Yanitza Munoz. Today we have a very special guest. We have Father Brian Vincenzo Guarini. Thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Yanitza.
So, Father, tell us a little bit about what inspired your journey into the priesthood and to be involved as a father for Sacred Heart congregation.
Well, I'm a cradle Catholic, and when I was growing up, we were, I would say, a semi-religious family. Go to church every Sunday. When I was in grade school, I was, of course, an altar server, and so I was close to the priests and the church. And when I was in elementary school, it was a Catholic elementary school, they asked me to be a reader. So I can remember walking up to the microphone in the front of church and doing the readings. And I think that kind of helped inspire me to continue to do things for the church. And then I started working, and I kind of fell away from the church, after, college years and that. And I don't know. I think in the back of God's mind, there was like, you should be doing this, not this. So that's what happened. And eventually I just said, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And I enjoyed being, involved with ministry in the church. And I thought, marriage doesn't, I'm not really into the marriage thing, and I would, and I have a lot of energy, so I want to give it to God.
That's beautiful. And it's interesting you brought up about, being in your 20s and falling away from faith. I find that to be very common. Nowadays, even myself as a millennial, I notice a lot of my friends, that's all happened to them in their 20s, or maybe they think that they're spiritual and that they're Christian, but it doesn't show with their actions. And something about your 30s, where maybe because we're a lot more mature, we see life in a different lens. We see life in a different lens because you see the good and the bad in different ways, and it brings you closer to God. So it's really interesting you brought that up, because I noticed that is a real thing with millions and millions of Christians, and they always come back, which is beautiful. So let's talk about your book, Beyond the Leprosy, and your time in Molokai. I know that you've been all over the world preaching the Lord, but this specific book speaks a lot about the history of Molokai, and I love that you wrote about the chronological history that happened there and how you and many others were able to bring faith to that island.
Yes. I'm a member of the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. We were the first missionaries in the Pacific, and our first place for our missionaries was in Hawaii. And this is almost 200 years ago, and we began ministering in Hawaii in 1827. We went to all the islands, including Molokai. Molokai was probably the last of the Hawaiian islands that we got to minister. I think my own journey to Molokai, I learned about it when I was I was studying to be a priest of the Sacred Hearts, and I learned the inspiring story of Father Damien. And everybody, I think most people know the story, but to me, it was very special. And I learned about it, but I never anticipated actually being there as a pastor on the island of Molokai where Father Damien was. And I had to pinch myself, because I'm thinking, when I first landed on Molokai, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm here where Father Damien was. And I'm like, I'm going to be the priest here. And It was like a real experience. I had goosebumps.
Yes, and I already know why, because Father Damien did so many good things to the community that was suffering from leprosy. So for our audience that is not aware of, back in the 1800s, that they used to put people with leprosy on Molokai because they were scared that the disease would spread amongst them in Hawaii or in Maui. And it was such a sad time because the antibiotics were not available where they can at least prevent the spread or treat these patients. So they were kind of like exiled and segregated and put away to die slowly on this island. And Father Damien went to that island and gave them hope, to the point where he unfortunately also died of leprosy, because he was always helping them and showing them love. And at the end of the day, it just shows you that even yourself, people that give their 100% to God are just people that are selfless, that just want to show appreciation for the Lord and love for others.
Yeah, and it really was a labor of love. All of our missionaries that were sent out to the Pacific in the very beginning, the stories that they would tell of being with the people, the indigenous peoples. Of course, the Hawaiians were a very they were a very spiritual people. We had priests and brothers serving in Hawaii many years before Father Damien even came. He was one of a long line of our missionaries who were serving when leprosy became really a really big situation in Hawaii. The government of the Kingdom of Hawaii decided to isolate those who had leprosy, and they were looking for a place to isolate them.
So they unfortunately decided to isolate them in Molokai.
Yeah, because they chose Molokai because it did have this small peninsula that was separated from the rest of the island by vertical 2,000-foot cliffs. The only way that they could get to this peninsula on the north shore of Molokai was by boat, and the ocean was usually pretty rough, so it was a very hard place to get to. And so the Kingdom of Hawaii government decided that we're going to send the leprosy patients to Molokai, and they basically just threw them off the boat and said, you have to fend for yourselves. They gave them a little bit of food and things, but they were pretty much on their own. And this was in the year 1866. Now, Father Damien studied to be a priest, and his older brother, in fact, was a priest in our congregation, a Sacred Heart's priest, and he was supposed to be sent to Hawaii, but he got sick in France, and so his younger brother, Damien, whose real name was Joseph, said, "I'll take my older brother's place. You can't send him to Hawaii, so I'll go." And so they sent Father Damien. He wasn't a priest yet, and he got to Honolulu in the year 1864. He was 24 years old, and he had not been ordained as a priest. And so they said, well, we need you as a priest. So they had ordained him in 1864 as a priest. And he was first, he really didn't know anything about Molokai. And there was no leprosy victims sent to Molokai until 1866. So he got there in 64. 2 years later, they started sending the first leprosy victims to Molokai. And he was sent to the Big Island in Hawaii, and was there for 8 years. And he would ride his horse around this huge district called the Puna district on the Big Island, and had to serve all those there in that huge district. And then after 8 years there, he was on Maui with some other priests, and the bishop asked for volunteers to go serve the victims of leprosy that are being sent to the island of Molokai. And so he was one of 4 priests that volunteered, and they were going to send each priest for 3 months, and then the next priest for 3 months. And Damien was one of those 4 priests. But it just so happened that Damien was the first priest to be sent to, the first priest of those 4 to be sent to Molokai. We had had priests, and we had had priests come to Molokai since maybe 1840, which was 30 years before Father Damien ever got to Molokai. We had had our Sacred Hearts priests serving there. In fact, we had some of our priests that were serving the leprosy victims there at Kalapapa, which is the peninsula. So there's a long history that we have as Sacred Hearts on Molokai. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because a lot of people know Father Damien, and they associate Molokai with Father Damien, and it's what he did once he came there. But most people don't know the history of our work as Sacred Hearts before Father Damien. That's why I call it Beyond the Leprosarium, because it is beyond just Father Damien's work with the leprosy victims. Because we did have priests even before Father Damien that I wanted to honor in the book, and the history is just a fascinating history. And we continue today to serve the 4 leprosy patients who are still there on Molokai. And there's only 4 left, or 5, and they're in their 80s and 90s. So we continue to this day to serve them. But my interest was really just serving my congregation as a priest, and being sent to Molokai was like, wow. It was one of those wow experiences, like, oh, well, here I am. And this is after I had been to places like India and Fiji and Tonga, out in the Pacific, the island countries. And my first exposure was really in India for some months. That kind of whet my appetite, and I was willing to go. And then when they asked me to go to Fiji, I said, of course. And then they asked me to go to Tonga, I said, of course. And then I got a call, and they said, well, we need you on Molokai. And I said, of course. It was hard for me to say no.
Well, you have a big heart, and the fact that you are definitely open to helping others to stay and have faith, because in this world, there's a lot of illnesses, there's a lot of misinformation regarding illnesses, and people tend to segregate each other and treat others inhumanely because of that. I remember when I went to India for the first time, I saw poverty of another level and class systems of another level. I was unfortunate to see. You see some people living a really luxurious life, and some people literally on the streets, naked, children with inflamed stomachs. And it was heartbreaking to see. It really opened my eyes to the cruelty of this world, but at the same time showing that there is good and bad, and we just have to keep moving forward and helping the good prosper. So I applaud you for everything that you've done. And, with tying it back to Molokai and the few that have leprosy on that island, for all those who aren't aware, leprosy is a bacterial infection. And even though we have the advances today to prevent it from spreading, some people have such severe complications to it where maybe they're not able to, other bodies not able to heal the same way. There's even been cases here in California. Nonetheless, we do have a lot of the antibiotics to help prevent the spread of it. But there are so many people like yourself that risk yourselves with being with the people who are ill and helping them have faith.
Yes, and over the years, when Father Damien ministered there with the victims of leprosy, they were trying to come up with a cure for leprosy, and there was no cure at that time. And there all kinds of experimental things were being done at that time. And Father Damien was always looking for some cures for the disease when he was there, because it was so ravaging to especially the indigenous Hawaiians who had no real resistance to leprosy. and and a lot of the native Hawaiians contracted leprosy, and they called it the Chinese disease because they think that it was people from China who came to Hawaii that spread the leprosy to the islands. That's why they called it the Chinese disease. But once I got to Hawaii and being out in probably the most isolated place in the world, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it was ravaging. And the native Hawaiian population just did not have the resistance to do it.
They didn't have the resistance, the resources,
No.
or the science to, at the time in the 1800s, they didn't have the science that would help them, like
Right.
the different types of studies that we have now.
And now they have medication that keeps it under control. When I was in India, I had opportunity to visit some of the leprosariums in India. We Sacred Hearts have a leper colony over there in not too far from Calcutta. Mother Teresa's sisters have several leprosy settlements and leprosy colonies, and got to visit some and see some of Mother Teresa's sisters, and when I was there in India, and also to be with them at their places in Calcutta, the orphanages and the House of the Dying, where they would take people off the street that were dying and give them a dignified death. It was quite eye-opening. That was my first time to Asia, and especially to go see Calcutta. I think there's so many parallels between leprosy and what we've gone through in the last 5-6 years, yeah, with the COVID,
Unfortunately, with COVID, so many people were isolated and there wasn't enough information, and there was so much drama on media, on the news, social media, and it was scaring a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a traumatic time for everyone in the world, because there's people that you loved that were isolated in hospitals, whether they went in for COVID or they went in for a broken leg, cancer treatment, where they went in for maybe just a surgery that they needed, but they were isolated, loved ones couldn't visit them, people were scared, and it was a really horrible time in history that hopefully in the future we can learn from. Not 100% to isolate your loved ones, because some people were dying of many other issues that weren't COVID, and then some were, and it was just a very sad time. But you hit it right on the nail there, how kind of history repeats itself in different ways. With Father Damien, he was there for the people and helped the people. I mean, I know leprosy is a whole different type of illness compared to the flu and COVID, but nonetheless, people were definitely segregating each other, but to an extreme.
Yeah, the isolation that the victims of leprosy had experienced, especially in Hawaii. They were separated from their families. And I think Father Damien connected very much so, very much so with that sense of isolation, because he was there and he felt very alone on Molokai. And I had the same feeling for the 3 years that I was there on Molokai during the pandemic. The isolation, it was very humbling, but it was very spiritual too. There was a certain amount of praying and just talking to God, because I mean you're pretty isolated there, and very isolated. And to this day, Molokai is it's still very isolated. There's only one way in and out of Molokai even today, and it's just a single engine 9-passenger Cessna that flies over from Honolulu, and it's the only way to get in or out, and just a small landing strip, and it's amazing because you can be on the west end of Molokai, and on a clear day you can see Honolulu across the water, and the difference is like night and day, because you have all the resorts and all that on Oahu, and then also on Maui, but on Molokai it's an entirely different world, even to this day, and that's why people they want to go there to see, to experience, the Molokai experience, because
It's a part of history.
it's a part of history, but it's still with us. It's still a living history, because once you land on Molokai, you feel something different. You just feel the presence of Damien. You feel the presence of those who were there at the leprosy settlement on that peninsula. And it was up until 1969, I believe, in the late 60s, when they finally, said, okay, no more leprosy victims are going to be sent to Molokai.
How did he transform the lives of those suffering with that disease?
Just by caring for them, loving them, and not judging them for their physical condition, not judging them for their morality. There were some people who were actually saying that leprosy was because people led immoral lives, and that was one of the things that people said. Well, they got leprosy because they were immoral, but what Father Damien did was to give them hope. This year is a special year for us in the Catholic Church. It's a Jubilee year, and Pope Francis is asking us to be pilgrims of hope. Well, I think Father Damien was certainly a pilgrim of hope and brought a lot of hope to people who had no hope, separated from their families and isolated, and they had to fend for themselves. No doctors, no facilities.
When did they start sending doctors to Molokai to kind of understand leprosy? Because I know leprosy has been around for hundreds of years, also in Europe, but aside from leprosy coming to Molokai through ways that they're not sure how it got onto the island of Hawaii or Maui, and then sending those infected to Molokai, were there any studies done on the island? Because now we have the antibiotics for this bacterial infection, but what was the process with Damien, communicating with these physicians on how to treat people?
Well, Damien was in touch with doctors, really doctors around the world he was in touch with, trying to find a cure that would work for his lepers.
His lepers.
And the word leper is a word that is not really used in Hawaii, because it's kind of a derogatory word, leper. It'd be victims of leprosy.
Or leprosarium.
Well, the leprosarium was where the settlement. But leprosy is the disease. But a leper has a connotation that is kind of more of a negative connotation to it. That's why they don't like to use the word leper. And I don't use it at all in the book, because to honor that.
Yeah, I noticed that you only bring up the settlement of the group of people involved, which that's why I brought it up, because it is a way to acknowledge the disease, but not to bring any derogatory language to them, because at the time, there's been hundreds of years of these cases, and people do kind of see them as, like a plague or something bad, but it's not their fault. And as you mentioned earlier, you brought up this superstitious ideology, they must have done something bad. No, they didn't. It was a bacterial infection. I mean, people didn't understand what bacteria was back then either. Just recently, people were in the 20th century, people understood the importance of washing your hands. So it's, and now in the millennia area, people are, we wash our hands a lot. We wear gloves when we handle food. So we've come a long way with germs.
They said about Damien that he was not clean, that he ate with the leprosy victims. He would eat from the same bowl as those who had leprosy, and that's how he got leprosy and died from leprosy. But he was just trying to be with the people, and of course he didn't really. It was 16 years being there before he really actually died of leprosy.
And that's a good point. These rumors were spread because people didn't understand his love for helping others. So they were just trying to build a negative context to it. And at the same time, who knows if it was really the leprosy that he eventually contracted that killed him, because he had it for 16 years. And he could have gotten it from dirty water, could have been from many other ways that people could contract leprosy. It's not really from shaking someone's hand or giving them a hug.
Or eating some of their food. Yeah. So he really didn't. He didn't really care as far as what other people thought, and he was a doer. He was a mover and a shaker, as you might say.
And today, Molokai, unfortunately, is still struggling with some financial issues, even though it's in such a tourist destination. You have Hawaii, Maui right there, but not many people want to go to Molokai unless there's someone like yourself who wants to go and help others, or maybe people of Hawaii that might have a vacation house there, but it's still to this day not a desirable place, which has affected its economy.
It has become more of it's more of like a place of pilgrimage, because the people that do come to Molokai, they either want to totally get away and really isolate themselves, or they're there to see where Father Damien was and the churches that he built, places where he worked and ministered, and where I stayed, the rectory there on Molokai, it was right next to one of the churches that he built on what we call Topside Molokai, Topside Molokai is everything outside of the peninsula where the leprosy settlement was. It's called Topside. And basically, when I was there for those 3 years, and our other priests who served there on Topside, it's basically the entire island, and except for that small 2 mile by 2 mile peninsula where the leprosy settlement, where the leprosarium was. But I want to go back to your question about, are they looking for cures? Were they doing? They had a research station back in the early part of the 20th century, right there at Kalapapa, and it only was there for a few years, but it was staffed by doctors, and they were trying to come up with a cure for leprosy. And so, yes, there was a research station. It was run by the U.S. Department of Health, I believe. They were trying to do that, but it didn't last very long, and they ran out of funds or something, and they left. And I don't know, was it the 1930s, 1940s, somewhere in the first part of the 20th century.
And another question I have: were they also sending people to Molokai from other states in the U.S., maybe California, Nevada, or was it just only in Hawaii?
It was only for those who lived in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. There was a leprosarium that was built in Arkansas for the continental United States. I can't remember the name of where exactly it was in Arkansas, but it was created as a leprosarium back in I believe the 1920s, 1930s. At the same time, they were still working for finding a cure for leprosy.
Well, it's good to know we've come a long way, and there's some treatments for it still, and people are able to have ease with the spread of it. Now, with your book, Beyond the Leprosy, while you're living on Molokai, when did you decide to write this book? From the year 2019 to be exact, to 2022, where you speak about the history of what was going on, mm-hmm. and how Father Damien has really helped all the people that were suffering from leprosy.
Well, as soon as I got there in 2019, I got there in October 2019, and the pandemic really hit just a few months later. I think February of 2020 is when it just shut everything down. And I had only been there for, let's say, November, December, maybe 3 months. And then all of a sudden it hit. And I really had very little ministry to do while I was there during those 3 years, because we could not have meetings, and and they closed the churches. The churches were closed for months at the beginning. And then when they reopened the churches, we all had to sit like 6 feet apart, and we couldn't gather in groups. And so my ministry was really very limited for those 3 years. And so I thought to myself, somebody needs to tell the story of our Catholic faith here on Molokai. We have letters from Father Damien that he wrote. We have letters from other of Sacred Heart's priests that were written even before Father Damien, having visited Molokai. And there's just a long history there and so I started writing, and I started going over I actually during the pandemic went over to our archives in Honolulu, our Sacred Heart's archives at our monastery in Honolulu. And I would go over there maybe once every other month and start doing research and putting together this chronology of the Catholic faith on Molokai, which really is the story of our Sacred Hearts, because we were really the only ones there on Molokai from the very beginning. And we were the ones from the very beginning of the Catholic Church in Hawaii, from the very beginning of the Catholic faith in the Hawaiian Islands. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear. Now, what message of faith and service do you hope people take away from Father Damien's life?
He's a good example of a faith that is unbounded faith, that doesn't stop because someone has leprosy or someone has a disease. When I was growing up, I can remember the AIDS pandemic when AIDS was going around the world, and people were afraid if you got AIDS, you were going to die within 6 months.
And they didn't understand how you could get AIDS. They thought maybe someone would have sneezed in the room with you, you would get it. There were so many rumors going around.
Yeah, you look at Magic Johnson, and people thought he was going to die within 6 months. And he's still alive today, but it was great. But there's a stigma that, and I think Father Damien had he didn't want anything to do with stigmas, because he believed in the love inside everyone. And that's what we as Sacred Hearts try and do. That's part of our charism, to spread the love of God wherever we go. And he was a perfect example of that. Yeah.
I love that, because at the end of the day, there's so much good and bad in this world, and we just really have to focus on the good and keep our faith. And my next question is, where can our viewers buy your book?
Well, they would have to contact me, because I'm the one that gets them printed up. They can get a hold of me through Father Brian, through Holy Name of Mary Catholic Parish in San Dimas.
If you are interested in buying his book, Beyond the Leprosy, you can find it here in the bottom of the screen, where I'm putting the links where you can purchase the book. He also has another book called God and Life on the Pecos, which is speaking about the history of Catholicism in New Mexico, which you also spent some time in New Mexico, which inspired you to write that book.
That is, yeah. I spent 11 years in southeastern Mexico, and I felt a very special presence there, and I wanted to write about it. And it was a very interesting part of New Mexico, southeastern New Mexico, and those 11 years I was there. When I came back to California, I thought, I want to write something about the history of, God and life in this part of America, because it was one of the last areas of the American West that was actually settled, in that part of New Mexico. And so that was the first book that I wrote, called God and Life on the Pecos. And it's you can get it through Amazon, or you can get it through, it's called West Bow Press. It's a division of Thomas Nelson Publishers and that. But anyway, it's on Amazon. But yeah, that was my first book. And then this book on Molokai was my second book, because I wanted to tell the story of, beyond the leprosarium, the story of the Catholic faith on Molokai, not just the leprosy settlement, but beyond that. And I just finished a book on the history of our Congregation of the Sacred Hearts here in California, which I have been fascinated by our history here in California, which goes back to 1832. The very first parish church in Los Angeles, La Placita, down at Olvera Street. La Placita was the first Catholic parish in Los Angeles. And the very first pastor of that first parish in Los Angeles was the Sacred Hearts. Most people don't know that. We started the first Catholic school in Los Angeles, which was right there at La Placita. People think, oh, it's, the Franciscans and their missions. We Sacred Hearts had priests at over half of all of the Franciscan missions. And we were helping the Franciscans when we first came to California, when we were kicked out of Hawaii because of the persecutions from the Protestant churches in Hawaii. They didn't want Catholic priests to be in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So they got the king and the queen to kind of kick out the priests. And then eventually they were allowed back into Hawaii. But we had two priests that were kicked out in 1832, and they sent them to they dumped them off in San Pedro here in Los Angeles, and that began our story in California. So it's a fascinating story of our Sacred Hearts here in California, which most people don't really know anything about. And so I finished that book, and I have that book that's also available. And then I'm working on another book that I'm going to Rome to do some research next month. And it's a book on the history of our mission throughout the world. So I'm pretty busy.
Beautiful. Well, I went to Rosary High School, and then I went to Loyola Marymount University. So maybe one day you'll be able to speak at either Rosary High School or LMU.
I'd love to share the story, especially here in California, that people really don't know our history of Sacred Hearts here in California. That we do go way back, and it's just amazing. The first parish in San Diego, the first pastor, Sacred Hearts. We started the first Catholic school in San Francisco, and it's just amazing, that most people don't know about. So,
was it a Jesuit school?
Well, actually, we were the Jesuits and the Sacred Hearts. We were kind of competing with each other up in the Bay Area, and the bishop up there asked us to start a school in San Francisco, Catholic school, and it was at Mission Dolores. And we had at that time, the pastor of Mission Dolores was a Sacred Hearts. We started a small Catholic school there at Mission Dolores back around 1850. And then the Jesuits came in and they started Santa Clara University in Santa Clara. And actually, we could not keep up our school. It only lasted for a couple years. And then we gave it to the Jesuits because we couldn't afford it. And the Jesuits took it over, and then it only lasted another 2 years, and then they gave it up, and then they eventually started the University of San Francisco and Santa Clara University. But the Sacred Hearts, we were there. We were the first asked to have the first Catholic school started in San Francisco.
Beautiful. Hopefully, as time goes on, there'll be more funding for faith-based universities. I know to this day, to all the denominations of Christianity, they're still hard, but hopefully one day more people would want to invest in faith-based education.
I live in Laverne, and I used to go to the Claremont School of Theology over in Claremont, and it was sad to see them leave Claremont. I know they're now, I think, over near Hollywood someplace, but they relocated. But to have them leave Claremont was sad, And faith-based universities are they're struggling because of the funding, yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. Well, we did another podcast a month or so ago with America's Christian Credit Union, and one of the CEOs spoke about different ways to have the ability for faith-based schools, or even all churches of all kinds can receive funding from them. That was something beautiful to hear, because now there's more people that are understanding the importance of faith-based businesses, churches, schools, etc. My last question for you is, have you experienced any miracles?
It's a miracle is something that happens, I believe, that you don't, I mean, you kind of, it's kind of a shock. It's kind of God's shock treatment. People can pray for miracles, and when something actually happens, and they consider it a miracle, it's kind of a combination of the hope that people have and God's intervention. And my own experience of miracles, I have done a lot of anointing of the sick and things, and I've seen people who kind of miraculously they're still living, and I've seen that. I mean, to me, that's miracles. In my own personal life, one time I almost drowned, and I thought, this is it, I'm going to die. And then just as I was going under the water, saying my goodbyes, somebody grabbed my hand and pulled me up. So, I consider that a miracle. But
No, that is a miracle. And I know exactly what you mean. The miracles I've experienced as well is when you have that moment where, how could that be? That surprise feeling, and there's no other explanation, not even science could explain it, and the person comes back, is healed, or you just experience a situation where you could have been taken out and it doesn't happen because of a prayer or a faith. So I know exactly what you mean. I've experienced many of those in my recent years, and to this day I wake up every day and I know that God is real. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Well, thank you so very much, Father, for taking the time to speak with me today. For our audience, please check out his book, Beyond the Leprosy. And here on the bottom of the screen, I'll be putting where you can find the book. Also, I want to encourage you to check out Renewal Rain. They are an amazing beverage, and I love that they have a positive message. They also have the Bible verse, Ephesians, on here, Ephesians 4:22-24, where we are taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by the deceitfulness, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. It's an amazing water brand. Support them. Also, please subscribe to the Christian channel here on YouTube. And if you're interested in subscribing to our streaming platform, you can go to christianchannel.com. Until next time, I'm Yanitza Munoz.